My name is Gloria Stephen. I am 28 years old. Last month, I reserved a private room at Bones, an Atlanta institution known for celebrating the city's biggest milestones. I asked for a table for 12. 10 people sat down. 2 chairs stayed empty. We were there to celebrate my promotion. I had just been named Regional Director of Supply Chain Logistics. I was the youngest person in my firm's history to hold that title. The 10 people seated around me were my work family. They were the colleagues who had shared late-night takeout covered for me during flu season and pushed me to ask for what I was worth. They were ordering appetizers and pouring wine, their laughter filling the room. But at the head of the table, 2 high-backed leather chairs sat empty. They were reserved for my parents, Thomas and Barbara. An hour ticked by. I kept looking at my phone, the screen dark and silent. I forced a smile and made polite excuses. I blamed the infamous Atlanta traffic on Piedmont Road. I blamed a possible mix-up with the reservation time. I played the part of the understanding Southern daughter. My team saw right through my performance. They had seen the cracks in my armor for 4 years. The hum of the restaurant faded into a heavy, uncomfortable quiet as the truth settled over our table. My parents were not coming. They had abandoned me on the proudest night of my professional life. I stared down at the pristine white tablecloth. I felt a familiar hollow ache forming behind my ribs. It was the specific pain of knowing you are an afterthought to the people who are supposed to put you first. Then my senior manager took control. Sarah was a formidable woman who commanded boardrooms without raising her voice. She picked up her crystal water goblet and tapped the rim with a silver spoon. The sound silenced the room. She stood up, smoothed her blazer, and instead of looking at me, she looked directly at the 2 empty chairs at the head of the table. "Gloria," she said, her tone stripping away all the polite pretenses we had been keeping up. "I have something I have been wanting to say for a long time. Before I tell you what Sarah said and how her words gave me the courage to burn my old life to the ground, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Eva Tells Stories. But do it only if this story speaks to your own experiences. Drop a comment, letting me know your age and what city you are watching from right now. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to that table, to the toast that shattered my illusions, and the text message that proved exactly what my parents were doing while my chairs sat empty." Sarah stood at the edge of the long mahogany table. The dim, golden lighting of the private dining room cast a warm glow over her features. She did not look at me with pity. Pity is a cheap emotion. She looked at me with the fierce protective certainty that only a true mentor possesses. "Those chairs are not empty," Sarah said, raising her crystal goblet toward the vacant seats at the head of the table. "They are finally making room for people who actually value you." The room erupted. My colleagues raised their glasses, their cheers bouncing off the wood-paneled walls of the steakhouse. The sound wrapped around me like a physical shield. For 2 decades, I had carried the suffocating weight of being unlovable. Sitting in that room surrounded by my logistics team, that invisible burden lifted. I took a sip of my champagne and let the warmth of their acceptance wash over me. Growing up in Alpharetta, a pristine suburb nestled just north of Atlanta, I learned very early on that I was the family ghost. In our neighborhood, appearances dictated your worth. Success was measured by manicured lawns, gated driveways, and European sedans sitting in the garage. My parents, Thomas and Barbara, built their entire identity around projecting an image of flawless Southern perfection. They hosted garden parties and attended country club galas, smiling bright, practiced smiles for everyone they met. The crown jewel of their immaculate life was my younger sister, Savannah. Savannah was a former teen pageant queen. She possessed a demanding energy that sucked the oxygen out of every room she entered. While I was quiet and observant, she was loud and fragile. Thomas and Barbara adored her. They orbited her like planets trapped in a gravitational pull. In her 20s, Savannah transitioned from beauty pageants to a lifestyle of chronically finding herself. She hopped from one expensive pursuit to another. She dropped out of interior design programs, attended costly silent retreats in the desert, and abandoned artisan startup ideas as quickly as she conceived them. Every new whim was funded without question. The differences between us were woven into the daily fabric of our household. On Savannah's 16th birthday, a silver SUV appeared in our driveway adorned with a giant red bow. My parents filmed her squealing reaction and posted it for all their friends to see. On my 16th birthday, Barbara handed me a laminated municipal bus pass and a brief lecture about building character. When Savannah decided she wanted to attend a pricey out-of-state university to study holistic wellness, Thomas drained a significant portion of his savings to fund her tuition, her luxury off-campus housing, and a generous monthly allowance. When I brought home my acceptance letter to a local community college, they told me times were tight. They said I needed to be realistic about my prospects. I became realistic. I worked 3 jobs. I served tables at a sticky diner off the highway, stocked shelves at a corner pharmacy under flickering fluorescent lights, and tutored high school students in math just to cover the cost of my textbooks. I slept 4 hours a night. I studied on the bus. I pushed myself to the brink of exhaustion because I believed it was the only way forward. My parents never raised their voices at me. They never threw plates or locked me in my room. Their cruelty was far more refined. They simply looked past me. I was treated as a functional utility rather than a living, breathing daughter. I was the one who unclogged the kitchen sink when the pipes backed up. I was the one who remembered to pay the utility bills on time. I organized the tax receipts and reset the router when the internet went down. I was the reliable background noise to Savannah's dramatic symphony. Whenever I achieved something, the response was always the same. I remember the day I landed my first entry-level corporate job. I drove to my parents' house clutching the offer letter in my hand, my heart hammering with fragile hope. I found them in the living room. I told them my starting salary and my new title. Thomas gave me a tight, polite nod. "That is nice, Gloria," he said, his eyes already drifting back to the television screen. Less than 10 seconds later, Savannah burst through the front door in tears because her favorite yoga instructor had moved to California. My parents immediately swarmed her, offering soothing words and a cup of herbal tea. My offer letter remained crumpled in my fist. I walked out the back door unseen and uncelebrated. I swallowed the pain. I folded my resentment into tiny, manageable squares and tucked them deep inside my chest. I convinced myself that familial love was a meritocracy. I believed that if I just worked hard enough, climbed the corporate ladder high enough, and achieved a title prestigious enough, they would finally look at me with the same starry-eyed admiration they reserved for my sister. I thought this regional director promotion would be the turning point. I thought booking a private room at a famous restaurant would force them to sit at my table and acknowledge my worth. Sarah's toast broke that lifelong delusion. Looking around at the 10 people who had chosen to be there, who celebrated my late-night supply chain models and cheered my difficult client negotiations, I realized I had been begging for water from a dry well. These colleagues were my real family. They recognized my grit. They respected my mind. They did not care about pageants or country club prestige. They cared about loyalty and mutual support. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of genuine joy. We ordered decadent desserts and shared stories about our most chaotic shipping disasters. I laughed until my ribs ached. For a few hours, the ghost of Alpharetta vanished. I was just Gloria, a successful woman surrounded by her peers. As midnight approached, the waiter brought the final check. I handed over my corporate card, feeling a profound sense of closure. The meal was finished, and so was my waiting. We spilled out onto the Atlanta sidewalks, the humid night air wrapping around us. We exchanged warm hugs and promises to tackle the new quarter with everything we had. I watched my team disperse into the city, feeling lighter than I had in years. I walked toward the valet stand, ready to go home and start this new chapter of my life. The valet handed me the keys to my modest sedan. I tipped him, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door. The quiet of the car wrapped around me, a stark contrast to the lively restaurant. I reached into my purse to plug in my phone. The screen illuminated the dark cabin. A single notification glowed against the lock screen. It was a text message from my mother. My thumb hovered over the glass. A tiny, foolish part of my brain expected a belated apology. I thought she might offer an excuse about a severe traffic jam or a sudden illness. I swiped the screen and opened the message. It was not an apology. It was a catalyst. Those few casual sentences staring back at me would shatter the last remaining fragment of my familial duty. That single text message was the spark that would set my entire life on fire. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan. The glow of my phone screen illuminated the dark cabin. I read the message from my mother. It said she was sorry. It said my sister Savannah had experienced a crisis with her new lifestyle brand launch. It said my parents had to be there for her. Then came the final sentence, the one that shifted my entire worldview. My mother asked me to send my corporate credit card information because they needed to order emergency catering. I read those words until the letters blurred together. The sheer audacity of the request paralyzed me. Using a company credit card for a personal family party is gross misconduct. It is grounds for immediate termination. My mother was casually asking me to commit corporate fraud to risk the regional director title I had earned just hours ago, simply to feed guests at my sister's vanity event. They had not missed my promotion dinner due to a flat tire. They had not missed it because of a sudden illness or a genuine emergency. They missed the proudest night of my professional career to fund a party for Savannah. And they wanted to use my money to do it. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel. The cool leather grounded me. For 4 years, I had been keeping my parents afloat. When I landed my first mid-level management role, Thomas called me into his home office. He looked weary and defeated. He told me his independent consulting business was experiencing a severe downturn. He spoke about the heavy burden of maintaining our pristine family home in Alpharetta. He leaned heavily on my sense of duty. In the South, you are taught to protect your family reputation at all costs. I wanted to be a good daughter. I wanted to earn their respect. So I took over their primary expenses. Every first of the month, $3,000 automatically transferred from my checking account to pay their mortgage. Every 15th, another $1,500 transferred to cover the minimum payments on Savannah's various credit cards. I drove a 10-year-old car and lived in a modest apartment so my family could maintain their flawless suburban facade. I passed on vacations with my work team. I wore budget blazers to executive meetings. I packed my lunches while my peers dined at upscale bistros. I delayed saving for my own future. I made those sacrifices willingly because Thomas would occasionally sigh, mention his rising blood pressure, and praise my reliability. I thought I was saving them from financial ruin. The sun rose the next morning, painting the Atlanta sky in shades of peach and gold. I did not go to the office. I drove straight up Highway 400 toward Alpharetta. I needed to see this supposed crisis with my own eyes. I needed to understand what kind of catastrophic emergency required me to risk my career on the night of my milestone achievement. I arrived at my parents' neighborhood unannounced. The sprawling properties sat quietly behind wrought iron gates and manicured oak trees. I expected to find a household in distress. I expected to see my mother pacing the kitchen and my sister in tears over whatever business disaster had kept them away from my dinner. Instead, I found a spectacle. The long circular driveway was packed with vehicles. I saw a sleek black sports car, a pristine luxury SUV, and several other high-end sedans parked on the immaculate grass. This was no emergency. This was a scheduled, highly curated event. I parked 2 blocks away and walked back along the tree-lined sidewalk. I did not ring the front doorbell. I slipped through the side gate and walked quietly toward the backyard. The morning air smelled of expensive blooming jasmine and catered food. I stood hidden behind a row of tall boxwood hedges, allowing me a clear view of the patio. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated across the imported stone pavers, carrying silver trays of mimosas and miniature quiches. At the center of the lawn, Savannah was posing for a professional photographer. She wore a flowing silk designer dress, laughing, tossing her hair, and holding up small frosted glass bottles of her new organic skincare line. My mother stood nearby, directing the photographer to capture Savannah's best angles. Barbara adjusted the lighting reflectors and beamed with maternal pride. My chest felt tight. The air trapped in my lungs refused to exhale. My corporate card was supposed to pay for those mimosas. My hard-earned logistics salary was meant to fund this serene aesthetic photo shoot while I had spent the previous night staring at two empty chairs. Savannah had not experienced a crisis. She had simply mismanaged her event budget, and my parents expected me to cover the shortfall without a second thought. They expected me to foot the bill for her vanity project, while they could not even spare 2 hours to celebrate my decade of hard work. Then I heard my father's voice. Thomas was standing near the outdoor kitchen holding a crystal glass and chatting with a wealthy neighbor. I remained perfectly still behind the hedges, listening to the man who had begged me for mortgage money just 4 years ago. The neighbor congratulated my father on the beautiful launch event. He asked how the family was managing to fund such an impressive setup for Savannah's new venture, knowing how expensive startup costs could be. My father chuckled a warm, booming sound that carried across the patio. He told the neighbor that my little logistics promotion was a true blessing. He bragged that my new salary simply meant more seed capital for Savannah's brand. He spoke about my career achievement as if it were a successful harvest on his own personal farm. He viewed my late nights, my stress, and my relentless corporate grind solely as a resource to be extracted for his favored child. He did not see my promotion as my victory. He saw it as Savannah's new funding stream. I stood in the shadow of the boxwood hedges and let his words echo in my mind. Seed capital, little logistics promotion. All the pieces of my childhood and my adult life snapped into a cold, clear picture. I had spent my entire life trying to buy their love with my obedience and my paycheck. I thought my financial support was a bridge that would finally connect us. I thought keeping the Alpharetta house out of foreclosure would earn me a seat at their table. I was wrong. I was not a daughter to Thomas and Barbara Stephen. I was a utility. I was a checking account. I was a financial pipeline designed to keep their golden child comfortable. They did not care about my title, my long hours, or the respect I had earned in my industry. They only cared about the direct deposit that hit their accounts every month. I turned away from the hedges. I did not make my presence known. I walked back down the quiet suburban street toward my modest car. My sorrow evaporated, leaving behind a sterile analytical clarity. I was a supply chain director. My job was to identify inefficiencies, blockages, and resource drains. My family was a broken system draining my resources. I was a bank to them. And as I unlocked my car door, I made a silent vow. The bank was officially closed. I did not storm the patio. I did not scream or overturn a tray of expensive mimosas. Confrontation implies a desire to be understood, and I no longer cared if my parents understood me. I walked back down the quiet, tree-lined street to my modest sedan. I slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors. The engine stayed off. The morning sun was climbing higher, heating the interior of the car, but my hands felt remarkably cold. I picked up my phone and opened my banking application. I navigated to the recurring transfers page. The numbers stared back at me, a digital ledger of my unrequited loyalty, $3,000 scheduled for the first of every month, labeled simply as a housing contribution. It was not my home, it was a stage set for Savannah. I tapped the screen. A prompt asked if I was sure I wanted to delete this scheduled transaction. I pressed confirm. The line item vanished. Next was the $1,500 transfer scheduled for the 15th, designated for Savannah's personal accounts. Another tap. Another confirmation. It took exactly 4 minutes to dismantle a financial pipeline that had drained my livelihood for 4 years. 4 minutes to stop buying love that was never going to be delivered. I started the ignition and pulled away from the curb. Driving south on Highway 400, the sprawling suburban estates gave way to the sharp, gleaming skyline of Atlanta. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, but my mind felt pristine and clear. I was navigating away from a parasitic system. The lingering grief of my childhood was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. I arrived at the logistics firm headquarters in Midtown. Stepping out of the elevator onto the executive floor, the atmosphere shifted. This place was built on competence and merit. Colleagues greeted me with genuine smiles, congratulating me on the new regional director title. Sarah caught my eye from her desk and gave a subtle, encouraging nod. This was my territory. I had earned my space here through late nights, complex problem solving, and relentless dedication to my team. Before I could even reach my new office, the receptionist informed me that Beatrice Sterling requested my presence. Beatrice was the chief executive officer of our firm. She was a towering figure in the Atlanta business community, a woman who commanded respect with a mere glance. She wore tailored suits and spoke with a refined, soft Southern cadence that masked a razor-sharp intellect. You did not cross Beatrice. She had built this logistics empire from the ground up, navigating a tough industry by being smarter and faster than her competitors. She demanded excellence, but she rewarded loyalty with fierce, unwavering protection. I walked into her spacious corner office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the bustling city below. Beatrice was standing by her mahogany desk. She did not bother with pleasantries. She handed me a porcelain cup of black coffee. "You look like a woman who just woke up," Beatrice said. Her dark eyes studied my face, assessing the subtle shifts in my posture. "Sit down, Gloria. Tell me what happened after dinner." I sat in the leather guest chair. The hot coffee warmed my palms. For the first time in my life, I dropped the polite facade. I did not cover for my parents. I told Beatrice everything. I detailed the text message from my mother asking me to commit corporate fraud to cater Savannah's vanity project. I explained my morning drive to the Alpharetta house, the catered waitstaff, the professional photographer, and the brutal conversation I had overheard from the boxwood hedges. I laid out the financial reality, the 4 years of paying their mortgage and funding my sister's whims, while they treated me like a disposable asset. Beatrice listened without interrupting. She did not gasp. She did not offer empty platitudes. She placed her hands flat on her desk, her expression hardening into unyielding steel. The polite warmth in her eyes vanished, replaced by a chilling protective fury. In the corporate world, Beatrice despised inefficiency and theft. Hearing that her top regional director was being bled dry by opportunists triggered her deepest instincts. Gloria Beatrice said, her voice smooth and deliberate. "In the South, we protect our own." She leaned forward, holding my gaze. "And you are my own. You have earned your place in this firm. You have built our supply chain network, managed our toughest clients, and proven your worth 10 times over. I will not watch you be exploited by people who view you as an endless checking account." She picked up her gold pen, turning it slowly between her fingers. "You did the right thing by cutting the cord today. But you need to understand the psychology of the people you are dealing with. Opportunists do not detach quietly. They will not reflect on their behavior and apologize. When they realize the money is gone, they will panic. They will try to manipulate the narrative. They will come for you, Gloria. They will use guilt, shame, and public pressure to force you back into submission." I took a steadying breath. "I know," I replied. "I am preparing for it." Beatrice offered a sharp, dangerous smile. "Good. But when they do come, you will not fight them alone. You have an entire corporation behind you. We handle hostile takeovers for a living. A suburban family dispute is nothing we cannot manage." I left her office feeling a profound sense of security. The contrast was staggering. My biological parents saw me as a tool to be used and discarded. My corporate mentor saw me as an investment worth protecting. I walked into my new office, arranged my files, and dove into my daily operations. I optimized shipping routes, negotiated carrier rates, and streamlined distribution networks. I applied the same ruthless efficiency to my job that I had just applied to my personal life. The days crawled by. The end of the month was approaching. Every morning, I woke up in my modest apartment, drank my coffee, and checked my calendar. I knew exactly how my parents operated. Thomas handled the bills on the 2nd of the month. He liked the routine. He liked the illusion of financial control. He never checked the accounts early because he assumed my loyalty was a permanent fixture. He assumed the automatic transfer would hit the bank, clearing the mortgage and allowing him to maintain his country club facade. The final week of the month felt like holding a breath underwater. I did not hear from Barbara or Savannah. They were likely too busy reviewing the photographs from the launch party, basking in the artificial glow of their manufactured success. They had no idea the foundation of their comfortable suburban existence had already crumbled beneath their feet. The timer was ticking down. The first of the month arrived on a Tuesday. The second of the month followed. I sat at my desk staring at my silent cell phone, waiting for the inevitable realization to strike. The quiet before the storm is always the most deceptive. I just had to wait for the first missed payment to register, knowing that the fallout would be swift, ruthless, and highly calculated. I kept my phone face up next to my keyboard. I focused on a quarterly logistics report tracking inventory metrics across the southeastern seaboard. My team moved around the office with their usual rhythm, unaware that a domestic countdown clock was reaching zero on my desk. At 2 in the afternoon, the screen illuminated. The incoming call displayed my father's name. The wait was over. The second of the month arrived with the quiet precision of a ticking clock. I sat at my polished glass desk on the executive floor overlooking the Atlanta skyline. My phone rested beside my keyboard. At 9 in the morning, the screen illuminated. The caller ID displayed my father's name. I did not answer. I watched the call go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, my mother's name appeared. Then my sister's. The digital assault had begun. Over the next 2 hours, my screen flashed with 32 missed calls. I kept my device on silent and continued reviewing a quarterly freight analysis. The frantic digital footprint left on my lock screen told a story of escalating panic. Thomas and Barbara had logged into their banking portal to find an empty ledger where my $3,000 housing contribution usually sat. The safety net they felt entitled to had vanished without warning. When toxic people realize they can no longer control you, they try to control how others perceive you. My parents did not leave a single voicemail asking if I was safe. They did not send a text inquiring why the funds were withheld. Apologies require self-awareness, and they possessed none. Instead, they defaulted to their most practiced survival tactic. They went on the offensive. Within days, a coordinated whisper campaign swept through the manicured neighborhoods of Alpharetta. In Southern suburban culture, gossip is an art form. It is delivered with sweet smiles and fake concern. My parents knew exactly how to spin a narrative that protected their pristine reputation while painting me as the villain. They began telling our extended family and their country club peers that the stress of my new corporate promotion had fractured my grip on reality. My phone buzzed late one evening with a text from my cousin Bradley. The message read that he was worried about me. He asked if I was experiencing a manic episode. He said my parents were heartbroken and terrified for my well-being. I read the message and felt a cold, familiar clarity. In my family, mental health was never treated as a genuine medical concern. It was a convenient label used to discredit anyone who stopped following the rules. By branding me as unstable, Thomas and Barbara insulated themselves from judgment. A healthy daughter walking away from loving parents looks suspicious. A sick daughter abandoning her devoted family generates endless sympathy. The following morning, I received a tearful voicemail from my Aunt Linda. Her voice trembled with practiced theatrical grief. She said she heard my new job had turned me arrogant and greedy. She accused me of leaving my parents destitute in their twilight years. She begged me to remember the sacrifices they had made to raise me. I listened to the recording while standing in the office break room sipping a cup of green tea. The irony was palpable. The only sacrifices made in that household were mine. I deleted the voicemail. Frustrated by my silence, my family escalated their tactics. They realized that social pressure alone would not force me to reopen my wallet. Savannah's credit card bills were looming, and the mortgage grace period was ticking down. They needed leverage that threatened my livelihood. They decided to target the very thing that gave me independence. They targeted my career. It happened on a Thursday morning. Our human resources director, a meticulous woman named Brenda, received a distressed phone call. It was my mother. Barbara introduced herself as a deeply concerned parent seeking guidance. She spun a harrowing tale for the HR department. She claimed my mental health was deteriorating rapidly. She suggested the pressures of the regional director role were causing me to act out in destructive ways. She requested a formal wellness check, hinting that my behavior might soon become a liability for the firm. It was a calculated strike designed to humiliate me in front of my peers and jeopardize my hard-earned title. Barbara underestimated the culture of my workplace. She assumed the corporate world was as superficial and cutthroat as her social circles. She did not realize I had built a true work family. Brenda did not summon me to a disciplinary meeting. She walked directly to my senior manager. Sarah listened to the details of the phone call with icy professional detachment. Sarah had mentored me for 4 years. She knew my work ethic. She had sat beside me during grueling vendor negotiations and high-stakes supply chain crisis management. More importantly, she had seen the empty chairs at the steakhouse. Sarah understood the exact nature of the predators we were dealing with. Sarah instructed Brenda to document the call as a targeted harassment attempt by a non-employee. Then Sarah walked into my office and closed the door. She relayed the conversation factually, shielding me from the emotional sting. "We are handling it," she told me. "Your focus stays on the Southeast distribution merger. Leave the perimeter defense to us." The situation soon reached the desk of our chief executive officer. Beatrice Sterling did not tolerate external interference in her company operations. When Beatrice learned that my parents had attempted to weaponize our HR department against a top-performing executive, she took immediate decisive action. Beatrice summoned the head of building security. She provided them with names and physical descriptions of Thomas, Barbara, and Savannah. She issued a strict directive. My family members were flagged as hostile individuals. They were not to be granted access beyond the ground floor lobby under any circumstances. If they attempted to bypass the reception desk, security was instructed to escort them off the premises immediately. I sat in my office watching the seamless coordination of my colleagues. The contrast between my biological relatives and my professional network brought a profound sense of peace. My parents tried to tear down my reputation to regain their financial pipeline. My colleagues built a fortress around my career to ensure I could thrive unbothered. I did not have to defend my sanity or justify my boundaries. The people who mattered already knew my worth. Back in Alpharetta, the reality of their situation was growing dire. The smear campaign had failed to produce a single dollar. The HR stunt had yielded 0 results. Savannah's vendors for her failing lifestyle brand were demanding payment. The facade of their wealthy suburban existence was beginning to crack under the weight of unpaid invoices. Thomas could no longer rely on his charm to placate creditors. Barbara could no longer use gossip to pay the utility bills. Desperation breeds foolishness. Deprived of their silent, compliant funding source, and stonewalled by my refusal to engage my family, realized they had run out of indirect tactics. They could not shame me into submission. They could not manipulate my employer. The passive-aggressive strategies had run dry. They needed cash to sustain the illusion of their perfect life, and they believed I was still the naive girl who would fold under direct pressure. Driven by entitlement, they made their most arrogant miscalculation yet. They convinced themselves that if they cornered me in my professional environment, the fear of a public scene would force me to surrender. They believed the threat of embarrassment would make me open my bank accounts just to make them go away. They decided to abandon the phone calls and the rumors. They planned an in-person ambush at the logistics firm headquarters. They thought they were walking into a place where they could wield parental authority. They did not realize they were marching directly into a corporate stronghold designed to repel intruders. The stage was set for a confrontation they could never win. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I sat at the head of a sleek, glass-walled conference room on the 20th floor, overseeing our quarterly logistics review. The projector illuminated the dark room with heat maps detailing freight distribution across the southeastern seaboard. My team was engaged. We were analyzing port delays in Savannah, analyzing transportation costs, and restructuring delivery timelines for our largest retail clients. For the first time in my life, I held the floor, and people listened. They respected my input. They valued my strategic vision. Then my executive assistant Clara caught my eye through the glass partition. Clara was a seasoned professional who rarely interrupted executive briefings. She tapped lightly on the glass pane and gave a sharp, urgent nod. I paused my presentation, handing the laser pointer to my lead analyst, and stepped out into the carpeted hallway. Clara kept her voice low. Her expression was tight with genuine concern. "Your father and sister are downstairs in the main reception lobby," she whispered. "Security tried to turn them away, but your father is threatening to cause a public scene if you do not come down right now." A cold, heavy stone dropped into the bottom of my stomach. In the affluent neighborhoods of Alpharetta, where I grew up, public embarrassment was the ultimate weapon. Thomas used the threat of a scene to maintain total control over his household. He knew that decent society recoiled from loud arguments and messy displays of emotion. He assumed I was still the obedient, subdued daughter who would fold under the pressure of keeping up appearances. He believed bringing his temper into my professional sanctuary would force me to submit simply to quiet him down. I took a deep breath. The polished air of the corporate hallway filled my lungs. I told Clara to alert building security to stand by, but to hold their distance. I did not want uniforms swarming the lobby unless it became unavoidable. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer and walked toward the elevators. I watched the floor numbers descend, feeling the familiar childhood anxiety threatening to creep back into my throat. I pushed it down. I was no longer the girl scraping by on a diner wage while her sister drove a pristine SUV. I was a regional director. I was on my own turf. The elevator doors parted to reveal the sprawling expanse of our corporate lobby. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture featuring imported white marble geometric lighting and a towering reception desk manned by 2 security guards. The environment was designed to project wealth, efficiency, and order. Standing in the center of that immaculate space were Thomas and Savannah. They looked painfully out of place. My father wore his standard country club attire, a pastel polo shirt tucked into khaki trousers with a woven leather belt. His face was flushed a deep, angry red. He was pacing, tracing a tight, agitated circle on the marble floor. Savannah stood a few feet away, scrolling on her phone with a look of profound annoyance. She wore a designer silk blouse and oversized sunglasses pushed back into her pristine blonde hair. She looked as though she had been dragged out of bed at an unreasonable hour and resented the inconvenience of having to terrorize her sister before noon. I walked across the lobby. My heels clicked against the marble, echoing in the cavernous space. Thomas stopped pacing the moment he saw me. He did not offer a greeting. He did not ask how my day was going. He closed the distance between us, stepping so close I could smell the bitter tang of stale coffee on his breath. "What is wrong with you?" he hissed, his voice vibrating with barely contained rage. He kept his volume just low enough to avoid drawing the immediate attention of the security desk, but his tone was laced with pure venom. "The bank called me this morning. You missed the auto transfers. The grace period for the mortgage is ending. You are going to ruin our credit score." He stared at me, expecting me to wither. He expected me to stammer an apology, to claim it was a banking error, and to pull out my phone to wire the funds immediately. I held his gaze. I kept my voice perfectly level, stripping away every ounce of emotion until nothing remained but cold, hard facts. "I did not miss the transfers, Dad," I said. "I canceled them." Thomas blinked. His brain struggled to process the rebellion. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I am no longer funding your lifestyle." I continued, my voice steady and unwavering. "I am no longer paying the mortgage on a house that treats me like a ghost. I am no longer subsidizing Savannah's credit card minimums while she poses for photo shoots. The financial arrangement is over." Savannah sighed, a loud, dramatic sound that cut through the tension. She lowered her phone and rolled her eyes. "Gloria, stop being dramatic," she whined, treating my declaration of independence like a minor scheduling conflict. "My brand is scaling. I am gaining traction with wellness influencers online. I need capital to keep my momentum going." She reached into her oversized leather tote bag and pulled out a manila folder, shoving it into my chest. I took it reflexively. "Dad said you are going to hire me as a consultant at your firm, so I have a steady income stream," Savannah said, adjusting the strap of her bag. "We brought the vendor agreement. You just need to sign the paperwork and set up the direct deposit. I will not even have to come into the office. We can just list it as remote advisory work." I stood in the center of the lobby, holding the manila folder, stunned by the sheer, staggering audacity of the demand. They had not driven to Midtown Atlanta to beg. They had not come to guilt me into turning the auto pay back on. They had driven here to demand a fake job. They believed my hard-earned corporate position was nothing more than a new mechanism for them to exploit. They assumed that because I held an executive title, I could simply invent a phantom roll siphon company payroll into Savannah's bank account and commit corporate fraud just to keep her lifestyle brand afloat. In their minds, my entire existence was designed to serve them. My success belonged to them. My resources were their resources. They operated under the delusion that I would risk my reputation, my career, and my freedom to ensure Savannah never had to work a real day in her life. "You want me to put you on my company payroll for a job that does not exist?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "It is just consulting." Savannah scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "Everyone does it. You have the authority now. Just push it through HR. It is not a big deal." I looked from my sister to my father. Thomas was nodding in agreement, his anger replaced by a smug, expectant satisfaction. He truly believed he had outmaneuvered me. He thought presenting a fake employment contract was a brilliant corporate loophole. I was preparing to tell them exactly what would happen if they ever set foot in this building again. I was preparing to signal the security guards to escort them out to the humid Atlanta street. But before I could speak, a shadow fell over my father's face. The smug satisfaction vanished. His eyes widened, focusing on something just over my shoulder. Savannah stopped chewing her gum, her posture suddenly stiffening. I did not have to turn around to know who had arrived. I could feel the shift in the air pressure. I could hear the rhythmic, authoritative click of pristine heels against the marble floor. My biological family thought they could bully me into submission. They thought they could waltz into my sanctuary and demand fraudulent checks. But they did not realize they had walked into a fortress, and they certainly did not realize that the chief executive officer of the firm, Beatrice Sterling, was standing right behind them. Beatrice Sterling did not raise her voice. In our corporate culture, volume indicates a loss of control. Beatrice possessed perfect control. She stepped seamlessly between my father and me. Her tailored suit brushed against my arm, offering a physical barrier. "Excuse me," Beatrice said. Her tone dripped with an icy southern politeness that could freeze rivers. "We do not offer no-show contracts at this firm, and you are trespassing." Thomas attempted to puff out his chest. He tried to summon the patriarchal authority he used to dominate our suburban household. He opened his mouth to deliver a lecture, but the CEO simply raised one manicured hand. The gesture silenced him instantly. Beatrice signaled the two security guards waiting near the reception desk. They moved forward with quiet efficiency, flanking my family members. My father recognized the shift in power. He realized he was no longer the ruler of the room. He adjusted his woven belt. His face turned a mottled crimson. He turned toward the glass doors, unwilling to risk a public escort. Savannah lacked her father's situational awareness. Insulated by a lifetime of coddling, she viewed the ejection as a personal insult rather than a legal boundary. As the guards ushered them toward the exit, my sister spun around on her designer heels. She glared at me, twisting her lips into a petulant sneer. "Whatever, Gloria," Savannah snapped. Her voice echoed off the marble walls. "The bank already approved my business expansion loan anyway. I do not need your stupid job." She flipped her blonde hair over her shoulder and marched out of the building. The heavy glass doors slid shut behind them. The lobby returned to a pristine, professional quiet. My colleagues went back to their desks. Beatrice gave me a brief, approving nod before heading back to the executive suite. I walked to the elevator, pressing the button for the 20th floor. The adrenaline from the confrontation began to fade. A cold, creeping sensation of unease took its place. Savannah's parting words echoed in my mind. Business expansion loan. The phrase snagged on my analytical instincts. I knew my sister's financial history intimately. I knew it because I had funded it for 4 years. Savannah possessed 0 assets. She had no verifiable income and no collateral. Her credit score was decimated by years of unpaid retail cards and abandoned wellness retreats. Traditional financial institutions do not extend unsecured capital to people with her economic profile. Banks require proof of revenue. They require a guarantor with a pristine credit history. I stepped out of the elevator and walked straight to my corner office. I closed the oak door, engaged the privacy blinds, and sat at my desk. My hands hovered over the keyboard. A dark, awful suspicion took root in my chest. I opened a new browser tab. I navigated to a comprehensive credit monitoring portal. I entered my social security number. I verified my identity through the security prompts. I requested a full unredacted report. The loading icon spun on the screen. Those 5 seconds felt like an eternity. Growing up, Thomas always handled the household documents. He kept the filing cabinets locked in his study. He managed the tax returns, the insurance forms, and the medical bills. He had access to my social security number from the time I was a child. When I turned 18, he insisted on opening my first checking account with me. He claimed it was a fatherly duty to teach me financial literacy. In reality, it was a mechanism to monitor my wages. The credit report loaded on my monitor. I scrolled past my familiar accounts. I saw my modest auto loan. I saw my single, perfectly managed corporate credit card. I saw my student debt, which I had paid off 3 years ago through sheer discipline. Then a new trade line appeared under the recent activity section. The entry was logged exactly 2 weeks ago. My breath caught in my throat. It was a commercial business loan. It was issued by a regional bank headquartered in Buckhead. The total principal amount was $150,000. The primary recipient was listed as Savannah's newly registered limited liability company. I scrolled down to the liability details. My eyes scanned the small print. There it was. The primary guarantor listed on the debt was Gloria Stephen. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. The ambient hum of the office ventilation system faded into the background. The reality of the document on my screen washed over me. My parents had not just used me for mortgage payments and spending money. They had escalated their extraction to a criminal level. Desperate to fund Savannah's extravagant launch party and sustain her failing lifestyle brand, they had stolen my identity. They had walked into a financial institution. They had presented my personal information. They had forged my signature as a co-signer on a 6-figure debt. The betrayal shifted instantly. This was no longer a painful domestic dispute about favoritism. This was no longer a toxic family dynamic involving neglected dinners and verbal slights. This was a severe, actionable federal crime. The logistics of their scheme unfolded in my mind with terrifying clarity. Thomas had likely used his old connections from his consulting days to fast-track the application. Barbara, whose handwriting shared a faint genetic similarity to mine, had likely falsified the physical signatures on the guarantor forms. They assumed I would never find out. They believed I was so focused on my corporate climb that I would never scrutinize my own credit profile until the loan matured. They thought they could extract $150,000. They planned to funnel it into Savannah's vanity project. They intended to leave me holding the liability when the venture inevitably went bankrupt. They counted on the old Southern tradition of keeping family secrets buried. They counted on my silence. I printed the detailed credit report, the printer words spitting out the pages that documented their felony. I took a highlighter from my drawer. I marked the fraudulent trade line. I highlighted the origination date. I highlighted the guarantor details. The paper felt heavy in my hands. A unique kind of grief accompanies the realization that your creators view you as nothing more than raw material to be harvested. But the grief was fleeting. It was quickly replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. My father had taught me a profound lesson today. He taught me that loyalty only flows one way in our household. I placed the printed documents into a sleek black folder. I stood up from my desk. I smoothed my blazer. I did not shed a single tear. Crying was a response for victims. I was no longer a victim. I was the regional director of supply chain logistics. My job was to identify system failures and neutralize them. I was about to execute a systemic elimination of a toxic liability. I walked out of my office. I bypassed my assistant Clara with a brief gesture indicating I would be unavailable for the next hour. I marched down the carpeted corridor toward the executive wing. The realization that my family had committed wire fraud and identity theft required a specific type of retaliation. Calling the local authorities would be the standard response. But a standard response would give Thomas room to spin the narrative. He would hire a defense attorney. He would claim it was a misunderstanding. He would drag the legal proceedings through the mud while portraying me as a vindictive daughter, trying to ruin him over a simple clerical error. I needed a strategy that offered no escape. I needed a plan with no room for manipulation and maximum public exposure, the kind of exposure that would strip away their country club facade forever. I arrived at the heavy oak doors of the chief executive suite. I did not bother knocking. I pushed the door open and walked straight into Beatrice's office. It was time to bring in the lawyers. Beatrice did not hesitate to escalate the situation. She walked to the polished console on her desk and pressed a single button to summon the top corporate litigator in our firm. Less than 5 minutes later, the heavy oak doors of the executive suite swung open and Harrison Cole stepped into the room. Harrison moved through the legal world with the quiet, predatory efficiency of a shark navigating deep water. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit and carried a secure tablet that held the keys to dismantling rival corporations. He was brilliant, ruthless, and entirely devoted to protecting the interests of the logistics firm and its key personnel. We moved to the adjacent boardroom to inspect the evidence. The space was intimidating, featuring a long mahogany table and a wall-mounted digital display. I slid the printed credit report across the polished wood toward Harrison. I watched his eyes scan the highlighted trade line documenting the $150,000 loan. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He simply unlocked his tablet and accessed the regional bank's commercial lending portal through a secure legal back channel. The ambient hum of the climate control system filled the silence as we waited for the data to load. Harrison tapped the screen, routing the digitized origin documents directly to the large wall monitor. The application forms materialized in high definition. Savannah's newly registered limited liability company was prominently listed as the primary debtor. The address matched my parents' pristine suburban home in Alpharetta, but the focal point was the bottom of the final page. Magnified on the screen was the guarantor's signature line spelling out Gloria Stephen. I stared at the blue ink rendered in stark digital clarity. To an untrained observer, the signature looked like an impressive match to my own handwriting. But I knew the subtle curves and specific sharp angles of that script intimately. I recognized the distinct looping style that used to sign my permission slips and report cards in elementary school. Barbara had held the pen. My mother had walked into a financial institution, looked a loan officer in the eye, and committed forgery to fund a fleeting vanity project for her favored child. Harrison leaned forward, resting his elbows on the mahogany table. His voice was flat and devoid of emotion as he delivered his assessment. This is a textbook violation of federal banking laws. He pointed a silver stylus at the screen. You are looking at felony wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. Because the funds cross state lines during the digital disbursement process, it triggers immediate federal jurisdiction. We have enough actionable evidence to go to the police right now. I can have financial crimes detectives knocking on their front door before dinner. His proposal was highly logical. It offered a swift, decisive resolution to the crime. I looked over at Beatrice, who gave a slight nod indicating she would throw the full weight of her influence behind whatever path I chose. A quiet, terrifying calm washed over my entire body. The residual sting of betrayal evaporated, leaving behind a sterile, surgical focus. Calling the police from a secure boardroom felt too quiet. It felt too private for the magnitude of the offense. I shook my head slowly, keeping my gaze fixed on the forged signature illuminating the room. We are not calling the authorities today, I said, my voice steady and unwavering. Harrison raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the refusal to take the immediate legal victory. Beatrice leaned back in her leather chair, waiting for my reasoning. If I just call the police right now, they will spin the narrative, I explained. I know exactly how Thomas and Barbara operate. They will hire an expensive defense attorney. They will cry to the extended family and their country club friends that I set them up out of jealousy. They will claim it was a simple misunderstanding, a verbal agreement I forgot about, or a clerical error by the bank. They will paint me as a vindictive, unstable daughter attempting to ruin their twilight years over a minor financial dispute. I turned my attention away from the monitor and looked directly at Harrison. I refused to give them the shadows to hide in. I refused to let them play the victims at their social gatherings while I untangle my credit history in private. I want them to expose themselves. I want them to do it in an environment where they cannot twist the truth or manipulate the audience. Harrison leaned back in his chair, and a slow, predatory smile crossed his face. He understood the assignment perfectly. He thrived in the theater of corporate warfare, and he appreciated a client who sought undeniable public victories rather than quiet settlements. Beatrice stood up and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dense Atlanta skyline. "Our firm is hosting the annual philanthropic gala next week," she announced, her tone measuring the strategic possibilities. "We have reserved the Grand Ballroom at the St. Regis, Atlanta. It is the premier social event of the corporate calendar. Local politicians, high-net-worth clients, and the elite tiers of Southern society will all be in attendance. It is exactly the type of room your parents spend their lives trying to access." I envisioned the opulent setting. Crystal chandeliers, towering floral centerpieces, and a guest list filled with the exact demographic Thomas and Barbara desperately wanted to impress. Narcissists are driven by an insatiable hunger for status. They cannot resist an elevated stage. If we invited them to an exclusive high society event, they would not suspect a trap. They would only see an opportunity to showcase Savannah's brand to billionaires and executives. "That is the venue," I declared. "We will bring them to the gala." Harrison opened his laptop, preparing to document the logistics of the strategy. "We need bait," he noted, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "We need a plausible reason for them to attend and feel secure in their position." I pulled my mobile phone from my blazer pocket. I opened my email application and began drafting a message to my father. I chose my words with extreme care, adopting the submissive, accommodating tone they had trained me to use for 2 decades. I typed that I had taken time to reconsider Savannah's consulting contract after our morning encounter. I wrote that seeing them in the lobby had made me realize the importance of family unity and supporting my sister's dreams. I suggested that a simple remote consulting job was not enough to launch her lifestyle brand properly. Instead, I proposed a formal integration. I invited Thomas, Barbara, and Savannah to attend the St. Regis Gala as my honored VIP guests. I stated that I wanted to use my keynote address at the charity event to officially announce Savannah's brand partnership with our logistics firm in front of the most prominent investors in Atlanta. I read the draft aloud to Beatrice and Harrison. The email was a masterpiece of corporate flattery mixed with domestic subservience. It stroked my father's fragile ego by implying his intimidation tactics in the lobby had successfully broken my resolve. It appealed to my mother's thirst for social climbing by offering her a seat at a highly restricted table. Most importantly, it fed Savannah's delusion that her business was destined for greatness without requiring her to perform any actual work. Harrison gave a sharp nod of approval. "Send the message," he instructed. "Let us see how quickly greed overrides their common sense." I pressed send. The digital packet flew through the ether, carrying the instrument of their destruction. We did not have to wait long. Less than 12 minutes later, my phone vibrated against the mahogany table. It was a reply from Thomas. The response dripped with smug satisfaction. Thomas wrote that he was glad I had finally come to my senses and remembered my family obligations. He confirmed they would gladly attend the charity gala to support Savannah's grand announcement. He even added a postscript instructing me to ensure they were seated at a premium table near the stage so they could secure optimal photographs for their social media profiles. Blinded by greed and hubris, they enthusiastically agreed to walk directly into the slaughterhouse. They did not question the sudden reversal in my demeanor. They did not suspect that the daughter who had cut them off financially that very morning was now laying a calculated snare. Their arrogance was their fatal blind spot. They genuinely believed I had capitulated out of fear. With the bait accepted, the 3 of us transitioned into tactical planning. Harrison outlined the legal framework required to execute the trap without exposing the logistics firm to liability. He planned to coordinate quietly with the bank fraud division to secure verified certified copies of the forged loan documents. He would also arrange for plainclothes financial crimes detectives to be present at the hotel under the guise of standard event security. Beatrice took charge of the event logistics. She promised to adjust the seating chart, placing my family at the most visible table in the center of the ballroom. She would ensure the audio-visual tech team was prepped to route my presentation slides through a secure, isolated feed, preventing anyone from cutting the feed prematurely. I sat in the boardroom watching the gears of corporate retribution turn on my behalf. For my entire life, I had fought a solitary war against people who held all the leverage. Now I had an army of elite professionals backing my play. The days leading up to the gala would require ironclad discipline. I had to maintain the illusion of compliance while the federal investigators quietly processed the forged loan documents in the background. The stage was set, and the countdown to the grandest night in Atlanta had officially begun. The St. Regis Atlanta ballroom radiated an elegant, intimidating warmth. Crystal chandeliers suspended from the vaulted ceiling cast fractured light across 400 of the city's most influential figures. Centerpieces of white hydrangeas and silver branches stretched toward the glow, anchoring circular tables draped in heavy ivory linen. Waitstaff moved through the crowd with practiced silence, carrying trays of chilled champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. This was the logistics firm's annual philanthropic gala. It was a gathering designed to showcase corporate generosity while cementing alliances among politicians, regional executives, and old money socialites. I stood on the mezzanine terrace, gripping the polished brass railing and observing the floor below. Tonight was my formal introduction as regional director. I wore a tailored midnight blue gown chosen for its structure rather than its flash. I felt a quiet, steady rhythm in my pulse. The anxiety that used to paralyze me before family functions had vanished. My corporate team had orchestrated this evening with surgical precision. Down on the main floor, my colleagues were positioned with strategic intent. Beatrice Sterling held court near the center, mingling with a state senator. She wore an emerald silk pantsuit projecting effortless authority. Every time she laughed or nodded, the circle of listeners leaned in closer. Sarah stood near the grand entrance, engaging a group of high-net-worth clients. Her eyes continually scanned the incoming guests. Harrison Cole, the litigator who had built the legal cage awaiting my parents, leaned against a pillar near the audio-visual control booth. He swirled a glass of bourbon, projecting the relaxed demeanor of a man who held all the winning cards. They formed an invisible shield around the stage. They were my true family, ensuring the architecture of the trap remained flawless. At 8 o'clock, the heavy mahogany doors swung open. Thomas, Barbara, and Savannah made their entrance. They did not merely walk into the room, they arrived. My family treated social events like theatrical performances, and tonight, they were the stars. Thomas wore a custom-tailored tuxedo that draped perfectly over his shoulders. Barbara stepped onto the carpet in a floor-length silver gown, her wrists sparkling with fresh diamonds. Savannah flanked them wearing a bespoke champagne silk dress that clung to her pageant-trained posture. I looked at the fabric, the jewels, and the tailored wool. My mind calculated the retail value of their collective attire. I knew exactly how those garments had been funded. The $150,000 loan forged in my name had paid for my father's tuxedo. It had financed my mother's diamonds. It had purchased Savannah's silk dress. They were parading through the pinnacle of Atlanta high society, wearing the proceeds of wire fraud. Growing up, Barbara always drilled into me the importance of maintaining appearances. She used to spend hours ironing Savannah's dresses for Sunday services while tossing my clothes into a rumpled pile on the basement stairs. "We are judged by the image we present to the world," she would say, adjusting my sister's hair ribbons. The irony tasted metallic on my tongue. The pristine image they presented tonight was constructed entirely of theft. I watched from above as they navigated the crowded floor. Thomas immediately targeted a group of senior supply chain executives, using his practiced Southern charm to interject himself into their conversation. He laughed heartily, clapping a vice president on the shoulder, as if they were lifelong friends. Barbara floated from group to group, flashing a radiant, practiced smile. She complimented the wives of prominent investors on their attire, seamlessly weaving tales of her dedicated charity work into the dialogue. Savannah worked her own angle. She moved through the crowd with a stack of thick, embossed business cards, passing them out to anyone holding a champagne flute. I could lip-read her enthusiastic pitches from the mezzanine. She was promoting her new lifestyle brand, promising the executives' wives exclusive access to her non-existent holistic wellness seminars. She projected the aura of a thriving young entrepreneur, fully funded and destined for greatness. They played the roles of the wealthy, supportive, perfect family flawlessly. They believed they had successfully navigated the crisis. They assumed my email inviting them to the gala was a declaration of surrender. In their minds, my boundary setting earlier that week was just a temporary tantrum. They were convinced I had cowered under the weight of their intimidation and returned to my designated place as their quiet financial engine. Barbara turned her head, scanning the upper levels of the ballroom. Her gaze swept past the string quartet, playing softly in the corner, and locked onto me standing at the mezzanine railing. She did not look away. Instead, my mother tilted her chin upward and offered a smug, victorious little wave. It was the same condescending gesture she used when I handed over my first real paycheck to cover their property taxes years ago. Her eyes shone with triumphant satisfaction. She thought she had won. She thought I had fallen back into line, ready to be the obedient workhorse, providing the funds and the prestigious venue for her favored child to shine. I did not break eye contact. I lifted my glass of sparkling water toward her in a silent toast. A calm, genuine smile spread across my face. The ignorance of toxic people is their greatest vulnerability. They construct a world where their superiority is an unshakable fact. They simply cannot fathom that the person they have abused, dismissed, and underestimated for nearly 3 decades might possess the intellect to outsmart them. Barbara interpreted my smile as submission. She turned back to the crowd, her ego fully inflated, unaware that the ice beneath her designer heels was already cracking. Harrison caught my attention from the floor. He tapped the face of his watch. The financial crimes detectives were in the building, waiting in the staging area just behind the kitchen doors. The bank executives had confirmed the routing numbers. The trap was armed. The gala master of ceremonies stepped onto the grand stage at the front of the room. He tapped the microphone, sending a low, thrumming feedback sound over the speakers. The string quartet allowed their final notes to fade into the ambient chatter. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, his voice projecting crisp and clear over the sound system. "If I could please ask everyone to find their seats. We are about to begin our evening program." The crowd began to slowly migrate toward the numbered tables. I watched Thomas usher Barbara and Savannah toward a prime location near the front edge of the stage. Beatrice had personally overseen the seating chart, ensuring my family occupied the most visible spot in the entire venue. They sat down, adjusting their expensive garments, ordering fresh drinks from the passing servers, and preparing to bask in the glow of Savannah's impending business announcement. I turned away from the railing. I walked down the curved, carpeted staircase toward the backstage holding area. My heels made no sound on the plush runner. The hollow ache that had defined my childhood was entirely gone. I felt nothing but the sharp adrenaline of a professional executing a flawless strategy. The MC returned to the microphone, introducing the logistics firm's executives, outlining the charity's mission for the fiscal year, and thanking the prominent guests for their ongoing support. I stood behind the heavy velvet curtain, waiting for my cue. Sarah appeared beside me, handing me the small remote control for the presentation slides. She gave my arm a firm, reassuring squeeze. "It is time," the MC announced, gesturing toward the wing where I stood. "Please welcome our new Regional Director of Supply Chain Logistics to deliver the keynote address." The spotlight swept across the floor, illuminating the path to the podium. The applause began, polite and rhythmic. I stepped out from behind the velvet curtain and walked into the light. It was time for my speech. I stepped out from the velvet curtain and walked onto the main stage. The polished wood of the platform felt solid beneath my heels. The spotlight tracked my movement, casting a bright circle around me as I approached the podium. The applause from the audience was polite and standard for a corporate charity event. It was the warm, steady sound of 400 executives and high society guests welcoming a newly minted regional director. They clapped because it was expected. They had no idea they were about to witness a reckoning. I rested my hands on the edges of the acrylic podium. I looked out over the sea of faces. The ballroom was a landscape of glittering jewelry and tailored suits. Right there in the center, at a prime table near the stage, sat my biological family. Beatrice had ensured their placement was flawless. Thomas, Barbara, and Savannah were positioned where every single person in the room could see them clearly. They were vibrating with anticipation. Savannah sat upright, gripping her smartphone. She had the camera app open, ready to record the moment she believed I would announce her brand partnership to the Atlanta elite. She wore her champagne silk dress like a coronation gown. Barbara leaned forward, her diamond bracelet catching the stage lights. She offered a gracious, closed-mouth smile to the regional bank president seated to her left. Thomas sat with his chest puffed out, projecting the aura of a proud, successful patriarch. They looked like the perfect Southern family. It was a performance they had perfected over 3 decades. I adjusted the microphone. The ambient noise in the grand ballroom died down to a hushed, expectant murmur. I took a slow breath, letting the cool, conditioned air fill my lungs. I did not feel fear. Growing up in Alpharetta, I was conditioned to fear taking up space. If I spoke too loudly at the dinner table, my mother would sigh and tell me I was causing a headache. If I brought home a flawless report card, my father would quickly change the subject to Savannah's upcoming pageant schedule. I spent my entire youth shrinking myself to fit into the margins of their lives. Tonight, I was taking the entire stage. "Good evening," I began. My voice echoed through the high ceilings of the ballroom, steady and clear. It carried over the towering floral centerpieces and reached the farthest corners of the room. We talk a lot in the South about the concept of family. I paused, letting the opening sentence resonate. In the corporate world, pacing is everything. In storytelling, it is the difference between a plea and an execution. We are taught to honor our roots. I continued, holding my gaze steady on the crowd. We are taught to protect our own and to give without expecting anything in return. Down at the center table, my parents nodded approvingly. Barbara offered a soft, theatrical smile of agreement, placing her hand over her heart. Thomas puffed his chest out a fraction more. They thought this was the prologue to their public glorification. They thought I was setting the stage to thank them for their endless support before pivoting to Savannah's fake consulting contract. They were blinded by their own greed. For years, I believed that meant sacrificing my own future to fund my family comfort, I said. My tone remained conversational, but the underlying edge sharpened. I paid mortgages, I funded lifestyles, I placed my own ambitions on hold to ensure the people I loved never had to face the consequences of their financial choices. The atmosphere in the St. Regis ballroom began to shift. The standard corporate warmth evaporated. The polite smiles on the faces of the executives slowly faded, replaced by an intense, curious focus. Guests shifted in their chairs. The silence in the room grew heavier, thicker. This was no longer a standard charity keynote. The audience sensed the deviation from the expected script. At table 4, the smiles on the faces of my family members began to strain. Savannah lowered her smartphone slightly, her brow furrowing in irritation. She was waiting to hear her name. She did not like this detour into my personal history. Barbara glanced nervously at the bank president seated nearby, trying to maintain her serene facade. I kept my eyes locked on the teleprompter screen embedded in the podium, even though I did not need it. I had memorized every word. I had lived every word. In a healthy family, support is reciprocal, I told the silent ballroom. When one person stumbles, the others help them stand. But recently, my family taught me the true cost of unconditional loyalty. I let my gaze drop from the back of the room directly down to table 4. I looked straight into my father's eyes. They taught me that no matter how much you give, some people will simply decide to take, I said. The smugness on Thomas' face vanished. It did not fade gracefully. It fractured. The proud patriarch facade shattered, leaving behind a flicker of genuine, raw confusion. He shifted his weight in his chair, his jaw clenching. He looked at me as if I had just spoken in a foreign language. He opened his mouth to whisper something to Barbara, but the words died in his throat. He was trying to calculate the trajectory of my speech. He was trying to figure out how to regain control of the narrative. He was powerless. I gripped the edges of the podium. The smooth acrylic felt cool against my palms. I looked at Savannah, who was now staring at me with open hostility. I looked at Barbara, whose diamonds suddenly seemed very heavy on her wrists. They had walked into this ballroom expecting a coronation. They had forged my signature, stolen my credit, and assumed I would reward them with a public endorsement just to keep the peace. They believed I was still the obedient ghost from the basement. They did not realize that ghosts can haunt you. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to shout. The truth is heavy enough to crush a room without any added volume. When you build a life on deceit, I said, my voice ringing with cold authority, the foundation will eventually collapse. And tonight, we are going to look at the architecture of a very specific collapse. I reached out with my right hand and picked up the small black remote resting beside the microphone. My thumb found the primary button. Behind me spanned 3 enormous high-definition projection screens. For the past hour, they had displayed our firm's charitable metrics, soaring graphs of global outreach, and smiling photos of our community partners. They were the backdrop of a successful benevolent corporation. I looked at Thomas one last time. His eyes widened. A primal panic began to dawn on his features as his brain finally caught up to the reality of the situation. He realized he was not the guest of honor. He was the prey. In my periphery, I saw Harrison Cole lean forward from his table. His eyes were fixed on my father. Harrison was a predator, observing his quarry stepping into the snare. Beatrice sat beside him, her posture regal and unbothered. She sipped her sparkling water, offering a silent testament to the power of a chosen corporate family over a toxic biological one. I thought about the years I had spent tiptoeing around my parents' fragile egos. I remembered the Sunday mornings I spent detailing their vehicles while Savannah slept until noon. I remembered the anxiety that flooded my veins every time Thomas called my name, knowing it meant another demand, another extraction of my time or my money. I had allowed them to consume my youth because I mistook obedience for love. That cycle ended tonight. It ended under the crystal chandeliers of the St. Regis Atlanta. It ended in front of the local politicians, the hedge fund managers, and the high society matrons Barbara so desperately wished to join. The silence in the ballroom transformed into a tangible pressure. 400 guests stared at the stage, trying to process the tension radiating from the podium. I took a deep breath, letting the quiet stretch. I wanted my family to feel the full weight of the exposure. I wanted them to experience the exact sensation of having their pristine reputations stripped away in real time. They had spent their entire lives treating me like an invisible utility. Now I was the only thing anyone in the room was looking at. I pressed the button on the podium remote. The massive projection screens behind me flickered and changed. The button on the remote clicked with a soft, definitive snap. Above my head, the 3 towering high-definition projection screens flickered. The rotating slideshow of corporate charity metrics vanished. A bright, clinical white light washed over the darkened ballroom, illuminating the faces of 400 prominent Atlanta guests. I watched their eyes drift upward. I watched the realization wash away their polite society smiles. On the far left screen, standing 20 feet tall, was a high-resolution screenshot of the text message my mother had sent me on the night of my promotion dinner. The blue and gray speech bubbles were magnified for everyone to read. The text detailed her casual excuse for missing the proudest moment of my career. It displayed her cheerful admission that Savannah had experienced a crisis with her lifestyle brand launch. It ended with her brazen demand that I leave my corporate credit card information behind to fund emergency catering for my sister. The words "love you" sat at the very bottom, a toxic punctuation mark on a parasitic request. The guests in the room were seasoned business leaders. They knew what it meant to misuse corporate funds. A low, uncomfortable murmur began to ripple through the tables nearest the stage. People shifted in their seats. They glanced toward my family. The center screen held a different kind of truth. It displayed a grid of my personal bank statements, redacted for account numbers, but clear in their transaction histories. Row after row, month after month, The ledger proved a 4-year history of financial extraction. Line items showed $3,000 routed directly to the mortgage lender holding the deed to my parents' Alpharetta estate. Subsequent lines highlighted $1,500 transfers, routed to accounts owned by Savannah. The total sum highlighted in bold yellow at the base of the screen stood at $150,000. It was a digital monument to my stolen youth. For my entire life, Thomas had controlled the flow of information. He curated the image of a thriving, self-sufficient patriarch. He wore custom suits and paid country club dues while secretly relying on the daughter he treated like an indentured servant. The bank statements projected on the center screen stripped away that illusion in front of the exact peers he sought to impress. The numbers proved he was not a provider, he was a dependent. But the image on the far right screen delivered the fatal blow. It displayed the commercial loan document pulled straight from the regional bank portal. The crest of the financial institution sat at the top. The debtor was listed clearly as Savannah's Limited Liability Company. The loan amount matched the 4-year total of my previous contributions. $150,000. I aimed my laser pointer at the bottom of the right screen. A magnified image of the final page appeared, filling the visual field. It showed the primary guarantor signature line. The name Gloria Stephen was written in smooth, looping cursive ink. I leaned into the microphone. My voice rang cold and steady over the stunned silence of the ballroom. A week ago, my family forged my signature to fraudulently secure a 6-figure business loan. The polite southern veneer of the St. Regis ballroom shattered in a single instant. The uncomfortable murmurs erupted into a cacophony of audible gasps, sharp whispers, and dropped silverware. The clinking of crystal and the soft hum of background music died entirely. 400 of the most influential citizens in Georgia realized they were sitting in the same room as individuals who had just been accused of a federal crime. At table 4, the reaction was immediate. Thomas did not sit in stunned silence. A narcissist stripped of their public mask does not reflect, they attack. The blood rushed to his face, turning his complexion a dark, mottled red. The veins in his neck strained against his tailored collar. He leaped out of his chair so quickly that it tipped backward, hitting the carpeted floor with a dull thud. "Turn that off!" Thomas roared. His voice, usually so measured and charismatic, cracked with raw, unhinged desperation. He pointed a trembling finger at the stage, scanning the faces of the executives seated around him. "She is lying. Do not look at those screens. She is mentally unstable. She is sick." He was defaulting to the only playbook he knew. When the truth surfaced, he tried to discredit the source. He tried to weaponize the smear campaign he and Barbara had spent weeks seeding throughout their social circles. But calling a woman unstable while her verifiable bank records and forged loan applications are projected in high definition onto a 20-foot screen is a futile strategy. Thomas realized the crowd was not buying his frantic deflections. The hedge fund managers and state politicians were staring at him with undisguised revulsion. Driven by pure panic, he lunged forward, charging toward the stage stairs with the intent to physically tear the microphone from my hands. He wanted to rip the remote away and plunge the room back into comfortable darkness. He never reached the first step. Beatrice Sterling did not leave the safety of her executives to chance. Her private security detail, 3 men in dark, understated suits who had been blending into the shadows near the grand drapery, materialized in a fraction of a second. They moved with silent, fluid precision. 2 guards stepped squarely into my father's path, forming an impenetrable human wall at the base of the stairs. The 3rd guard stepped onto the stage, positioning himself just behind my right shoulder. Thomas slammed into the physical blockade. He tried to push past them, his hands grasping at the fabric of their jackets. The guards did not strike him. They simply held their ground, their expressions blank, gripping his arms and forcing him backward. The patriarch of the Stephen family, a man who had spent 3 decades intimidating everyone inside his home, was rendered entirely powerless by men who did not care about his suburban status. He struggled against their grip, his breathing ragged, his eyes wild as he looked up at me, standing safely out of his reach. Then a new voice cut through the chaos of the ballroom. "The documents are verified directly by the issuing bank, Thomas. Harrison Cole stood up from his table near the audio-visual booth. He held a wireless microphone of his own. The corporate litigator straightened his charcoal suit jacket. He projected the calm, lethal authority of a predator who had cornered his prey. The ballroom quieted again, pivoting their attention to the renowned attorney. "This is not a domestic dispute," Harrison stated loudly, his voice echoing from the surround sound speakers. "This is a matter of corporate and financial integrity. Our legal team pulled those origination files via secure channels. The IP addresses logging the application trace directly to your residential network in Alpharetta." Barbara, still seated at table 4, pressed her hands against her pale cheeks. She looked around the room, making eye contact with a prominent charity board member she had spent months trying to court. The board member looked away, shielding her face behind a champagne flute. Harrison took a slow, deliberate step toward the center aisle. "Furthermore, we engaged an independent forensic handwriting analyst to review the guarantor signature displayed on the right screen. We provided them with a decade of your wife's signed tax returns and community board authorizations." The silence in the room grew so tight it felt suffocating. "The analysis is conclusive," Harrison declared, his gaze locking onto my father, who was still restrained by the security guards. "The signature on the commercial loan does not belong to Gloria. The pen strokes the pressure points, and the structural loops match your wife's handwriting. Barbara forged that document." Thomas stopped struggling. The fight drained out of his posture, leaving him slumped in the grip of the security personnel. The delusion that he could shout his way out of a felony evaporated. He was trapped in the center of the grand ballroom, pinned beneath the weight of undeniable proof, while the elite peers he worshipped watched his total ruin. The reality of a wire fraud charge hovered over table 4 like a descending blade. The walls had closed in on my parents. But sitting mere feet away, bathed in the blue light of the projected evidence, Savannah realized her own shield was gone. The money was fake. Her parents were caught. And the name on the fraudulent business loan belonged to her. The revelation from Harrison Cole hung over the ballroom like a heavy velvet curtain. 400 pairs of eyes shifted from the glowing projection screens directly down to table 4. The elite members of Atlanta society, the very people my parents had spent their entire lives trying to impress, were now staring at them with unfiltered disgust. The facade of the pristine, perfect Stephen family disintegrated right there on the patterned carpet. Trapped in the center of the room, Thomas and Barbara found themselves suffocating under the weight of public judgment. Thomas stopped straining against the firm grip of the security detail. His chest heaved as his gaze darted around the perimeter, searching for a single sympathetic face among the crowd of executives and politicians. He found none. The local dignitaries he had warmly greeted just an hour ago were now turning their shoulders away. The illusion of his patriarchal authority evaporated. He was no longer a respected suburban businessman. He was a cornered suspect caught in a federal lie. Seated just a few feet away, Barbara began to unravel. Growing up, my mother treated social standing as her religion. She worshipped at the altar of country club memberships and charity luncheons. She judged her own worth by the caliber of people who accepted her invitations. Tonight was supposed to be her ultimate triumph. Instead, she was experiencing a devastating social exile. I watched from the podium as Barbara raised her trembling hands to her chest. She clutched the strand of expensive pearls draped around her neck. Those pearls were purchased during a shopping trip funded by the very same credit card minimums I had paid for years. Her breathing turned shallow and rapid. She was hyperventilating. The reality of her situation was crashing down upon her. She looked to her left, seeking reassurance from the regional bank president seated next to her. The bank president did not offer a comforting smile. He quietly stood up, picked up his suit jacket, and walked away from the table without saying a single word. That silent departure broke whatever remaining composure my mother possessed. She slumped forward in her chair, weeping into her hands as the reality of her ruined reputation settled deep into her bones. But the true fracture of our biological family was yet to come. Sensing the walls closing in rapidly, Savannah sat frozen in her champagne silk dress. For 28 years, my sister had been insulated from every hardship. Thomas and Barbara had shielded her from failure, paid her debts, and cultivated her immense entitlement. They raised a daughter who believed she was the center of the universe. They taught her to prioritize her own comfort over the well-being of everyone else. They never anticipated that their golden child would apply that exact same selfishness to them. Savannah stared up at the projection screen. She read the words, felony wire fraud and identity theft, echoing in the murmurs of the surrounding guests. She knew her limited liability company was listed as the primary debtor on that fraudulent document. The severe legal reality of the situation bypassed her usual vanity. She was not just facing a ruined lifestyle brand. She was facing federal charges. She was facing potential prison time. The loyalty she supposedly held for our parents vanished in a fraction of a second. Savannah pushed her chair back so hard it tipped over and clattered onto the floor. She scrambled away from the table, putting physical distance between herself and our parents. She looked around at the horrified faces of the crowd, desperate to salvage her own innocence. She pointed a shaking finger directly at the man who had funded her entire existence. "It was not my idea!" Savannah screamed, her shrill voice cutting through the low murmurs of the ballroom. "I did not do this. Dad told Mom to sign the papers." A collective horrified gasp swept through the room. The guests leaned in, witnessing a staggering display of betrayal. "I swear I had nothing to do with the forgery," Savannah continued, weeping openly now as she threw her parents under the bus to save herself. "They planned the whole thing in the kitchen. They said Gloria would be too scared to ever check her credit report. They said she was too submissive to ever question the bank. I told them it was a bad idea, but they did it anyway. I did not do the signature." The confession echoed off the crystal chandeliers. Savannah did not just deny her involvement. She provided a detailed spoken admission of their premeditated guilt to a room filled with corporate lawyers, financial executives, and plainclothes detectives. She handed over their motives and their methods on a silver platter just to ensure she would not be the one wearing handcuffs. Thomas spun his head around, staring at his favored daughter in unadulterated shock. The security guards held him in place, but his physical resistance was gone. He looked at Savannah as if she were a stranger. "He had drained my college funds to buy her cars. He had begged me for mortgage money to sustain her allowance. He had risked a federal prison sentence just to launch her fake business. And the very moment the consequences arrived, his precious visionary daughter sacrificed him without a single ounce of hesitation." Thomas created a monster of entitlement, and he was finally feeling its teeth. Barbara lifted her tear-streaked face from her hands. She looked at Savannah with an expression of pure betrayed agony. "Savannah, how could you say that?" Barbara wailed, reaching a hand out toward her daughter. "We did this for you. We risked everything to give you a chance." "I do not care," Savannah shrieked back, wiping her ruined makeup across her cheeks. "I am not going to jail for you. You ruined my brand. You ruined my life." The three of them began tearing each other to pieces right there on the public stage. Thomas yelled at Savannah for being an ungrateful, spoiled child. Savannah screamed back that he was a failure of a father who could not even afford his own suburban mortgage. Barbara sobbed uncontrollably, trapped between the husband she enabled and the daughter who had just discarded her. They traded vicious insults, airing decades of toxic dysfunction and financial desperation for the entire Atlanta elite to witness. They were doing the exact thing Thomas had spent his life trying to avoid. They were causing a messy, ugly, undeniable public scene. They were destroying the precious, pristine reputation they had spent decades building, and they were doing it to themselves. I stood at the acrylic podium, my hands resting lightly on the cool edges. I looked out over the ballroom, watching the implosion. I did not have to yell. I did not have to argue my case. I did not have to defend my sanity or beg anyone to believe my side of the story. I just had to provide the truth, turn on the lights, and watch them drown in it. For my entire youth, I believed my family was an unbreakable fortress. I thought their bond was built on genuine love, while I was simply the defective outsider who could never earn entry. Standing on that stage, I realized their fortress was built on sand. Their loyalty was conditional, based entirely on who was providing the funds and who was taking the blame. The moment the money stopped and the blame shifted, they devoured each other. The quiet, profound peace that settled into my chest was indescribable. I was free. I no longer carried the burden of trying to save people who would sell me out for a country club membership. I looked over at Beatrice and Harrison, my chosen work family, who stood by with calm, unwavering support. They had given me the tools to reclaim my life, but I was the one who had finally drawn the line. The argument at table 4 continued to escalate, drawing the disgusted stares of every person in the venue. The facade was gone. The truth was out. The era of Gloria Stephen, the quiet, obedient bank account, was officially over. Now all that remained was the final, inevitable intervention by the authorities waiting just outside the ballroom doors. Harrison Cole held the microphone close to his mouth. "That is quite enough," he announced. His baritone voice sliced through the shrill, echoing argument, tearing my family apart. He did not yell. He commanded the space with the practiced ease of a man who dismantles hostile corporate boards for a living. He lowered the microphone and cast a deliberate, unhurried glance toward the back of the grand ballroom. He gave a single crisp nod to the event staff standing near the entrance. The towering mahogany double doors swung open. The polished brass handles caught the chandelier light. 3 figures stepped over the threshold, moving in stark contrast to the gliding elegance of the gala guests. 2 uniformed Atlanta police officers marched in tandem, their duty belts clinking faintly in the vast, sudden quiet of the room. Leading them was a plainclothes financial crimes detective wearing a slate-gray suit and holding a thick manila folder. Harrison had arranged this precise timing days in advance. The forged loan crossed state banking lines, routing digital funds through servers in neighboring jurisdictions. That transaction elevated the fraud to an immediate actionable federal offense. The officers walked straight down the center aisle. The sea of 400 affluent guests parted seamlessly. Wealthy investors, state politicians, and corporate executives pulled their chairs forward, creating a wide, unobstructed path. The ambient hum of the St. Regis dissolved into a thick, suffocating tension. The detective kept his eyes locked on table 4. He did not look at the elaborate floral centerpieces or the crystal champagne flutes. He looked directly at Thomas, Barbara, and Savannah. The trio reached the table. The detective stopped just inches from my father. "Thomas, Stephen, Barbara. Stephen, Savannah." "Stephen," the detective said. His voice was level, projecting a cold official authority that required no amplification to carry across the silent floor. "We need you to step outside. We hold active warrants for your arrest regarding bank fraud and identity theft." For his entire adult life, Thomas navigated every obstacle with a slick, practiced charm. If a contractor disputed a bill, my father would invite him to play 18 holes at the local country club and smooth it over with a firm handshake. If a neighbor complained about property lines, he would bring over an expensive bottle of bourbon and talk his way into a favorable compromise. He operated on the firm belief that a well-dressed man with a confident smile could negotiate his way out of any consequence. He attempted to deploy that charm now. Thomas straightened, his spine tugged at the lapels of his custom tuxedo, and offered the detective a tight, familiar grin. "Officer, there is a misunderstanding here." Thomas began, his tone dripping with forced conversational warmth. "My daughter and I are just having a minor corporate disagreement. We can clear this up in the lobby without causing a scene." The detective did not return the smile. He did not acknowledge the tuxedo. "Turn around and place your hands where I can see them," the detective instructed, his tone dropping an octave. "This is not a negotiation. You are leaving this building with us today." The residual arrogance drained from my father in an instant. The illusion of his suburban sovereignty evaporated. He looked like a punctured tire losing air. His broad shoulders sloped inward. The ruddy, furious color that had painted his cheeks just minutes prior vanished, leaving his skin a sickly, pale gray. He realized the officers did not care about his affluent zip code. They did not care about his neighborhood standing. They only cared about the felony warrant sitting in the manila folder. One of the uniformed officers stepped forward, producing a pair of steel handcuffs. The metallic click echoed sharply across the room. Thomas offered no physical resistance. He allowed his wrists to be secured behind his back, his gaze fixed blankly on the patterned carpet. The reality of his impending incarceration had finally arrived, crushing his oversized ego under the weight of undeniable legal peril. Savannah watched the officer secure our father, her pageant-trained composure shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. She was accustomed to crying her way out of responsibilities. Growing up, if she forgot to complete a school project, Barbara would march into the principal's office and demand an extension, blaming the teacher's unreasonable expectations. Savannah never faced a genuine penalty for her actions. Now facing an officer holding a second pair of handcuffs, she panicked. She backed away, her designer heels tangling in the hem of her champagne silk dress. "I am not going with you!" Savannah shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical wail. "I am the victim here. They tricked me. You cannot arrest me. I have a brand launch tomorrow." The female officer grabbed Savannah by the arm, spinning her around with practiced efficiency. The steel cuffs snapped closed around her wrists. Savannah sobbed uncontrollably, her tears leaving dark, wet tracks down the front of her expensive silk gown. The officers moved to Barbara next. My mother did not fight. She stood up slowly, her hands trembling as she extended them toward the uniform. She held her chin high, attempting to salvage some fraction of her shattered dignity. She was a woman who defined her entire existence by her social standing. She hosted charity luncheons and scrutinized the attire of other women in her cul-de-sac, building a fortress of judgmental superiority. To be paraded out of the premier social event of the Atlanta corporate calendar in handcuffs was a fate worse than physical injury. It was total, inescapable social exile. The handcuffs clicked around her delicate wrists, locking her into her new reality. The detective motioned toward the exit. "Let us go," he said. The procession began. The two officers guided my father, mother, and sister down the center aisle, marching them back through the very same crowd they had tried to impress just an hour earlier. The high society guests did not look away. They stared openly. Some whispered behind raised hands. Others pulled out their smartphones, capturing the humiliating spectacle in high definition. The elite peers my parents worshipped were now the audience to their ultimate downfall. Thomas walked with his head bowed. As he passed a table of regional banking executives, his foot caught the edge of a heavy dining chair. He stumbled, pitching forward awkwardly. He could not use his bound hands to brace his fall. The detective caught him by the bicep, hauling him upright with a rough, unceremonious tug. "Keep moving," the detective ordered. Thomas did not look up. He kept his eyes locked on the floor, his spirit utterly broken. They approached the front of the stage. The path to the exit required them to walk directly past the podium where I stood. I watched them approach, feeling the solid acrylic edges of the lectern beneath my palms. I did not feel a rush of vindictive joy. I felt a profound, settling calm. The chaotic, noisy storm that had dictated my childhood was finally being escorted out of my life. As the group passed the stage, Barbara stopped. The officer holding her arm gave a slight tug, but she planted her heels into the carpet, refusing to move forward. She turned her head and looked up at me. Her immaculate facade was ruined. Dark mascara smeared beneath her eyes, tracking through her foundation. Her meticulously styled hair hung loose around her face. The smug, victorious wave she had offered me from the floor earlier that evening felt like a lifetime ago. She stared at me, her chest heaving. The sheer terror of her impending reality shone in her eyes. She was about to be loaded into the back of a police cruiser. She was about to be processed into a county holding cell. She saw her affluent lifestyle crumbling into dust. She looked at the daughter she had treated like a disposable financial pipeline, the daughter she had tried to ruin, and she decided to deploy her ultimate manipulation tactic. "Gloria, please," Barbara begged. Her voice was small, desperate, and trembling with genuine fear. "We are your family. You cannot let them do this to us." I looked down at the woman who had ignored my entire existence unless she required my wallet. Barbara stood frozen at the base of the stage. Her designer gown pooled around her ankles. The immaculate makeup she spent hours applying was ruined, tracking dark, wet lines down her cheeks. She gripped the edge of the stage, demanding I halt the legal machinery grinding her curated life into dust. She invoked the word family as if it were a magic spell capable of erasing years of financial exploitation. I stared at her, searching my own chest for a familiar pang of guilt. For my entire youth, a single disappointed sigh from my mother would send me spiraling into frantic servitude. I would scrub floors, organize receipts, and sacrifice my own savings just to earn a fleeting nod of approval. Tonight I searched for that scared, obedient girl and found nothing. I felt no rage. I felt no vindictive triumph. I experienced only a profound, settling peace. The financial pipeline was severed. The emotional pipeline was dead. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the clear acrylic podium. I brought my lips close to the microphone. The ambient silence in the St. Regis ballroom was so profound, I could hear the faint hum of the audio equipment. "You wanted Savannah to have my success, Mom," I said. My voice projected evenly across the vast space, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and the velvet-draped walls. "Now she has my full attention. I am pressing maximum charges." I stood up straight and took a deliberate step back from the lectern. I did not wait for her response. I did not watch her face crumple. I turned my body away as the plainclothes detective gripped my father's arm and guided the three of them toward the exit. The heavy mahogany doors swung open, revealing the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers idling in the circular driveway. The doors pulled shut with a definitive thud, severing my biological family from my reality. As the latch clicked into place, a warm scent of cedar and expensive citrus filled my immediate space. Beatrice Sterling walked onto the stage. The chief executive officer of my firm did not offer a formal handshake or a polite corporate nod. She closed the distance between us and wrapped a strong maternal arm around my shoulders. "You did perfectly, Gloria," she said, her tone radiating a fierce, protective pride. "You held the line." Footsteps echoed behind us as the rest of my team ascended the stage stairs. Sarah appeared to my left, her eyes shining with quiet validation. Harrison Cole stood to my right, holding his legal tablet like a broadsword. These were the people who had noticed the 2 empty chairs at my promotion dinner. They were the individuals who refused to let me celebrate my milestones alone. They formed a physical barrier around me, a true Southern work family shielding their own from the fallout of a toxic extraction. Then the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted. It did not erupt into the chaotic, frantic whispers of a scandal. Instead, a slow, rhythmic sound began near the front tables. A senior vice president from a rival logistics firm stood up and brought his hands together. A state senator joined him. Within seconds, the polite, scattered clapping swelled into a building resonant round of applause. 400 of the most influential citizens in Atlanta rose to their feet. They were not applauding a charity metric or a corporate merger. They were acknowledging the iron spine required to excise a parasitic threat in a culture that demands silent compliance. I looked out over the standing ovation. I had walked into that magnificent room as the designated scapegoat of a broken suburban household. I stood there now as a woman who had drawn an unbreakable boundary. I belonged in this room. I had earned my place at the table. The gala concluded without further incident. My team escorted me to a waiting town car, ensuring I returned safely to my apartment in the Virginia Highland neighborhood. I slept for 9 uninterrupted hours. It was the deepest, most restorative rest I had experienced in a decade. When I woke up, the Atlanta sun was pouring through my windows. I brewed a cup of black coffee and checked my phone. There were no frantic text messages. There were no manipulative voicemails demanding ransom for their affection. The silence was exquisite, but the machinery of justice does not rest on the weekends. At 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Harrison Cole. His voice held a sharp, predatory energy. "Gloria," he said, skipping the morning pleasantries, "we have a new development. Your father made his permitted phone call from the Fulton County holding cell at dawn. He did not call a defense attorney. He called a private wealth manager." I set my coffee mug on the kitchen counter. My analytical instincts flared to life. Why would Thomas call a wealth manager from jail instead of seeking bail assistance, I asked. Harrison chuckled a dry, humorless sound. Because Thomas believed he had a secret safety net, he explained. He tried to leverage the equity in the Alpharetta house to secure a quiet emergency line of credit. He planned to use the funds to post bail for himself and Barbara, leaving Savannah stranded in a cell while they fled the state to avoid federal prosecution. The betrayal ran so deep, they were willing to abandon their favored child the moment she became a legal liability. They had spent 3 decades grooming Savannah to be the star of their household, spoiling her with luxury vehicles and out-of-state tuition. Yet when faced with the stark reality of a concrete holding cell, Thomas and Barbara instantly calculated that their golden child was an acceptable sacrifice for their own freedom. But Harrison was always 3 steps ahead of his opponents. I filed a federal injunction the moment the police escorted them out of the ballroom. Harrison continued, his tone brimming with tactical satisfaction. When the regional bank verified the forged commercial loan documents, we initiated a civil asset forfeiture protocol. Thomas tried to borrow against a house he no longer controls. The bank froze the suburban estate at 8 o'clock this morning. They are initiating immediate foreclosure proceedings to recoup the stolen funds. Thomas has no hidden assets. He has no bail money. He has nowhere to run. The walls of his pristine country club illusion had finally crushed him. My father tried to execute one final selfish maneuver and walked directly into a concrete wall. This new financial reality meant they had no leverage to negotiate a favorable plea deal. They were trapped in the county jail, facing the full severe weight of the justice system. The situation in the holding facility deteriorated rapidly. Harrison informed me that Savannah had been granted a meeting with a public defender shortly after our father's failed banking attempt. The public defender informed Savannah that Thomas and Barbara had tried to post bond exclusively for themselves. Upon learning that her parents planned to leave her to face the wire fraud charges alone, Savannah's fragile loyalty snapped entirely. She requested an immediate audience with the district attorney. Savannah formally offered to turn state's evidence against our parents. She promised to provide emails, text messages, and detailed timelines proving that Thomas orchestrated the financial theft and Barbara executed the physical forgery. The golden child became the star witness for the prosecution, securing her own leniency by delivering the architects of her privilege directly to the prosecutor. The familial destruction was absolute, paving the way for the inevitable sentencing. 6 months have passed since the heavy mahogany doors of the St. Regis closed behind my biological family. The legal proceedings that followed moved with the swift, unrelenting efficiency of a freight train. Stripped of their stolen capital and facing the overwhelming evidence compiled by Harrison Cole and the federal investigators, Thomas and Barbara realized a public trial would only prolong their humiliation. The elite society they worshipped had already exiled them. To avoid a protracted courtroom spectacle that would document every detail of their fraud, they accepted a plea agreement. Today, my parents are serving federal sentences for wire fraud and identity theft. Their pristine suburban fortress in Alpharetta, the sprawling estate where I spent my childhood, sleeping in a windowless room and scrubbing marble countertops, was seized. The bank foreclosed on the property to pay the court-ordered restitution. I drove past that neighborhood once, a few weeks before the bank auctioned the home. The manicured lawns were overgrown with weeds. The wrought iron gates looked dull and neglected. The hollow shell of their social climbing was finally visible to the naked eye. Savannah managed to evade a prison cell, but her survival came at a steep, unyielding price. By testifying against our parents and handing over the digital correspondence that proved their premeditated guilt, she secured a probationary sentence. However, her legal immunity did not protect her fragile lifestyle. The moment the scandal hit the Atlanta business journals, her holistic wellness brand dissolved overnight. Investors pulled their seed money before the ink on the police report was dry. Social media influencers deleted her from their feeds, scrubbing any association with a convicted fraudster. The luxury sports car she loved to parade around town was repossessed by the dealership. Savannah is currently working a retail shift at a mid-tier department store in a suburban mall. She spends her days folding knit sweaters and organizing clearance racks to chip away at her mountainous legal fees. Occasionally, former country club acquaintances walk past her store offering her the same pitying, condescending glances she used to direct at me. She tried to reach out to me once. She sent a lengthy, tearful email begging for a small loan to help her secure a better apartment, claiming she had changed. I did not reply. I routed her email address directly to my spam folder. I owe her no explanations and no rescue. I have not spoken to any of them since that night at the charity gala. I do not monitor their court dates, and I do not check the internet for updates on their lives. The silence that fills my days now is not the heavy, oppressive quiet of a child waiting for the next scolding. It is the crisp, clear silence of a woman who has excised a parasitic drain and is finally breathing with both lungs. I sleep soundly untroubled by the phantom demands of people who only valued me for my credit limit. My career trajectory accelerated in the wake of the gala. Beatrice Sterling recognized my ability to navigate a high-stakes crisis without losing my composure. She saw that I could execute a complex strategy under intense emotional pressure. Last month, she called me into her corner office and offered me the position of Vice President of Global Logistics. I accepted the role along with the accompanying stock options and an expansive new office. I no longer drive a 10-year-old sedan, though I still hold a deep appreciation for the quiet humility that modest car taught me during my hardest years. With my new salary and a fully restored credit score, I purchased my own home. I did not choose a sterile, gated community in the distant suburbs. I bought a historic craftsman house in the Virginia Highland neighborhood, right in the vibrant, tree-lined heart of Atlanta. It features original hardwood floors, stained glass transom windows, and a wide, welcoming front porch. It is a home built on authenticity, not appearances. Every piece of furniture I bought was selected because it brought me joy, not because it looked expensive to a visiting neighbor. The air inside my house feels warm, safe, and entirely my own. This past Thanksgiving, my life looked drastically different. I did not wake up at dawn to baste a turkey I would barely get to eat. I did not set a table with fine china for people who treated me like the hired help. I did not stand in a kitchen doorway waiting for permission to sit down. Instead, I hosted my own dinner in my Virginia Highland dining room. I reserved the seats at my table solely for the people who had earned them. Beatrice arrived carrying 2 bottles of vintage Bordeaux. She left her intimidating corporate persona at the door, filling my kitchen with genuine booming laughter as she helped me carve the roast. Sarah brought her famous Southern pecan pie and spent an hour helping me arrange a beautiful autumnal centerpiece. Harrison Cole traded his bespoke charcoal suit for a comfortable cashmere sweater. He regaled us with hilarious redacted stories of his early days practicing law in rural Georgia, gesturing wildly with a glass of wine. We spent the evening eating, drinking, and sharing stories until our sides ached. No one criticized the way the napkins were folded. No one demanded an emergency catering run or belittled my accomplishments. It was a display of true Southern hospitality rooted in mutual respect, profound gratitude, and shared triumphs. I looked around my table at my work family, the brilliant individuals who had noticed the 2 empty chairs at the steakhouse all those months ago, and I felt a deep, resonant joy. If you are watching this and you see fragments of your own life in my story, I want you to listen very closely. Perhaps you are the one carrying the financial burdens of a household that never says thank you. Maybe you are the designated scapegoat, the quiet workhorse, who absorbs the emotional wreckage of a favored golden child. You might be shrinking yourself to fit into the narrow, ungrateful spaces your parents have carved out for you, believing that your relentless sacrifices will eventually buy their love and earn their respect. Hear this truth clearly: loyalty is not a suicide pact. Setting a boundary against toxic relatives is not a betrayal. It is a necessary act of self-preservation. You do not owe your abusers a share of your success. You do not owe them your credit score, your paycheck, or your sanity. Blood ties do not grant anyone a free pass to exploit your hard work or steal your future. The people who truly love you will never ask you to set yourself on fire just to keep them warm. They will not view your promotions as their personal funding streams. They will not ask you to commit fraud to sustain their vanity projects. If the environment you were born into requires you to sacrifice your self-respect, you have every right to pack your bags, walk out the door, and leave that environment behind. You hold the pen to your own story. You possess the power to cancel the recurring transfers, both financial and emotional. It will be terrifying at the beginning. The smear campaigns will come. The gossip will circulate. The guilt trips will feel heavy. But on the other side of that temporary storm is a profound, unshakable peace. You will discover a strength you never knew you had. Walk away from the people who treat you like an afterthought. Stop waiting for empty chairs to be filled by people who do not care about your milestones. Build your own table. Fill it with the mentors, the friends, and the allies who actually want to see you eat. Invite the people who will pull up a chair, raise a glass, and celebrate your victories without a hidden agenda. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. I hope my experience gives you the courage to examine the dynamics in your own life and recognize walking away not as a loss, but as a long overdue liberation. Claim your space, protect your peace. Until next time, this is Eva Tells Stories, and I am finally free.
When the dust settles after a storm like the one Gloria navigated, we are left standing in the quiet wreckage, forced to ask ourselves how a family reaches such a breaking point. The tragedy we witnessed is not merely a tale of financial theft or an unfortunate generational conflict. If we look closely through a mindful spiritual lens, we see the symptoms of a much deeper ailment. It is the story of a lost mindset, a household trapped by ego greed, and the hollow pursuit of material illusions. If you have been following these journeys, you know that the truth often hides just beneath the surface of our everyday lives. Please take a moment to subscribe and follow our channel, Eva Tells Stories, where we explore the raw, unfiltered realities of human relationships. Your support helps us continue to share these profound lessons. The deepest message echoing from Gloria's experience is a wake-up call to parents across America and around the world. A family is meant to be a sanctuary for cultivating the soul, a safe harbor where individuals learn to love and grow. It is not meant to be a theatrical stage constructed to satisfy the ego. To build a genuinely good life, to raise children who are whole and healthy, parenting must rest on three core pillars. We must guide our families with wisdom, morality, and true inner courage. Let us first consider wisdom, which is the ability to see through illusions and understand the natural laws of cause and effect. Modern society often measures the success of an American family by its external shell. We look at the sprawling suburban house, the pristine luxury vehicles parked in the driveway, and the children styled like trophies, and we assume that family has won the game of life. Gloria's parents lost their wisdom the moment they allowed their hunger for status to blind them to their own children's humanity. In their pursuit of a flawless public image, they twisted one daughter into a decorative ornament and reduced the other to a functional utility. True wisdom requires us to recognize that social prestige, money, and country club reputations are transient. They are fragile constructs that can collapse in a single evening. When parents plant seeds of exploitation and deceit, the harvest will inevitably be destruction. The act of forging a child's signature to steal her financial future is not merely a legal crime. It is a profound collapse of human decency. Wisdom teaches us a harsh but necessary truth. No one can construct their own happiness upon the suffering of another human being, least of all the very child they brought into the world. The universe keeps a meticulous ledger, and the debts of the heart are always collected. The second pillar is morality. In the context of raising a family, morality does not consist of providing a hefty allowance or a shiny new car. True morality lies in unconditional, pure love. It is a love that does not discriminate and does not demand repayment. A heartbreaking issue in many modern households is the unspoken belief that children are assets, long-term investments, or worse, personal banking dispensaries meant to be tapped whenever convenient. Ethical parenting requires a deep, unwavering respect for a child's independent existence. Authentic love does not play favorites. Pitting a favored child against a scapegoat is a silent, brutal form of psychological violence. It fractures the delicate bonds of trust, turning siblings into rivals and homes into battlegrounds. It leaves emotional scars that can take a lifetime to heal, teaching the neglected child that their only worth lies in what they can provide for others. In our culture, the the pressure to project a perfect image is heavy. We are taught to smile for the holiday cards regardless of the chaos happening behind closed doors. Yet a genuine home, even one that is humble, messy, and imperfect, holds infinitely more value than a wealthy household rotting from the inside out with fake smiles and transactional affection. Honesty must always outweigh appearances. A child needs a safe space to be vulnerable, not a corporate environment where affection is traded for compliance. The final pillar is willpower, or inner courage. We often confuse willpower with the endurance required to work long hours or climb the corporate ladder. But the most vital form of courage is the strength to face the dark corners of our own hearts and cut away the toxic habits we harbor. For parents, this means having the extraordinary courage to admit when they are wrong. It requires lowering the ego enough to look a child in the eye and offer a genuine apology. Tragically, many individuals would rather watch their families burn to the ground than admit their own weakness. The journey of self-correction is arduous. It asks parents to constantly chip away at their own selfishness and pride, dismantling the generational trauma they may have inherited from their own parents. For adult children like Gloria, courage takes a different form. From a higher perspective, cutting off financial support and allowing abusers to face the legal system is not an act of cold vengeance. It is compassion paired with sharp intellect. True courage is daring to forge boundaries made of steel to protect your own spirit. Society often tells us that walking away from family is a betrayal, but sometimes it is a rescue mission for your own soul. The most profound act of love you can offer someone who has lost their way is to stop shielding them from the consequences of their actions. Allowing people to experience the fallout of their own deceit is often the only lesson strong enough to wake them up. Life is a rigorous training ground, and the home is our most challenging, meaningful classroom. Instead of frantically chasing a superficial version of the American dream built on shiny surfaces and hollow achievements, we must pivot toward a dream of genuine peace. We must clear our own hearts, choosing to love our children with fairness and grace. When we cultivate the wisdom to distinguish truth from illusion, the morality to love without conditions, and the courage to do what is right, even when it is painful, we offer our children the ultimate legacy. We do not leave them sprawling estates or heavy burdens. We leave them a whole, unbroken soul and the freedom to live a life that is truly their own. As you reflect on the empty chairs in Gloria's story, take a moment to look around your own dining table. Look at the people gathered there. Are they seated out of obligation, fear, or a transactional need? Or are they there because the space you have created is warm, honest, and safe? We all have the power to decide who gets a seat at our table. And sometimes the most peaceful rooms are the ones where we finally let the wrong people go, leaving us to wonder if the quiet they leave behind is an ending or the very beginning of our real lives.
Welcome to our space. I'm excited to share how we're redefining professional development.